Chapter 8. Wednesday, 18th of April 2012. Sonny gazed out of the tiny window at the sea far below and wondered what the fishing would be like in those waters. The island of Holo was just a few minutes away, and yet another glance at his watch told him that it was approaching 7 in the evening. The return journey from Farrar's office to the airport had been as torturous as the initial drive over, and once they'd passed through the diplomatic channel, they'd heard the news that the plane was suffering a technical fault in the avionics. The resulting delay meant they didn't arrive in Zamboanga City until 5 in the afternoon, by which time Farrar had been in touch with the latest developments.
I got the call from Abu Sayyaf, but they didn't use Sam's phone, so we have no way of updating his current position. However, he did manage to tell me he was on a boat heading southwest, which means his most likely destination is Holo.
He'd pronounced it Holo, as the locals did.
Once you touch down in Zamboanga, you can catch a connecting flight to Holo. Be warned, though, there is a US base close to the airstrip, and I don't think they'd take kindly to you turning up armed to the teeth. Once you arrive, flash your new credentials, bribe them, do whatever you have to, just get the hell out of there before the military take an interest in you.
With that advice ringing in his ears, Sonny had booked them 2 seats on an Airfill Express DHC-8 for the 35-minute flight. The plane touched down on the single airstrip and taxied to the gate, where any concerns they had about customs inspections proved unfounded. Once outside, they flagged down a battered taxi and asked to be taken to the Bud Daho Trail. Bud Daho is a volcano rising out of the centre of the island to a height of just over 2,000 feet. Its last eruption was over 100 years ago, and while it was considered active, there was little chance of it going off in the next few days. It was dark by the time they reached the beginning of the trail, and as expected, there were no other visitors to worry about. They paid off the taxi driver, who insisted he would be happy to wait for them, but Sonny declined the offer. He even offered his services as a guide up the mountain, but Sonny insisted they knew the way, and he reluctantly drove off into the night. Once the headlights had disappeared, Sonny and Len changed from their tourist clothes and comfortable shoes for field uniforms made from disruptive pattern material and sturdy hiking boots. The DPM had an infrared reflective coating, which made the wearer less likely to be spotted by anyone using night vision devices that detected infrared signatures. Donning their own night vision goggles and cradling their suppressed MP5SDs, they set off up the trail, maintaining a moderate pace to ensure they didn't alert anyone to their presence. Having studied a Google map of the island, they'd agreed that the most likely landing place for Sam and the others would be the north end of the island, and from there they would most likely head inland. Their plan was to get to high ground, and from there make a night sortie to try to locate their friend. Should that fail, they would wait until they got an update the following afternoon, and close in on the latest location. It was midnight by the time they got to within 100 feet of the summit, and found a good location for their lying-up point. After snacking on sandwiches they'd purchased at the airport, they cleaned their weapons and set off back down the side of the conical volcano, this time heading north. With their M4 assault rifles slung over their shoulders, they walked slowly, Sonny on point with his heckler and cock at the ready. 10 yards behind him, Len scanned the area to their sides, occasionally turning to check their 6. An hour into the search, they came across a building and stopped 20 yards short to check it out. It was built on stilts, with the floor raised 3 feet off the ground. There appeared to be no sign of movement. After a 10-minute wait, Sonny edged closer while Len covered his advance. It took another few minutes to cover the ground, then Sonny popped his head round the corner and returned to signal the all clear. Len joined him and saw that they'd come across a storage hut, piled a couple of feet high with coconuts. With no sign of any targets, they took a quick drink break before Len took his turn on point. For a further 2 hours they snaked their way through the jungle without coming across anything larger than a cockatoo. Finally they agreed to head back to their temporary camp and get some shut-eye. Daylight was barely 4 hours away, and they took a more direct route back up the mountain, little realizing that at one point they passed within 200 yards of Sam, as he once again tried to get some sleep, with only a tree for a pillow. It had taken just over 6 hours for the boat to cover the 150 kilometres from Basilan to Holo. When they arrived at the deserted beach just after dark, they were again transferred ashore using the inflatable. If the banker had a galley on board, Sam and the other hostages were not on the dining list. Once they began the march into the jungle, he knew it would probably be the next day before they got another bite to eat. All the while, he kept close to Dindo in anticipation of an AFP attack, hoping he could take out the young Muslim with his hidden shiv and grab his weapon to aid his escape. Unfortunately, no such attack took place, and at around 11 in the evening they arrived at yet another temporary camp, but one which was vastly different from the others he had been in. The first difference was the number of terrorists he saw, close to 200 by his estimate. There were also boxers galore, and all the weapons on view looked like they'd just come from the factory. As they entered the camp, they passed a huge pot of rice and a selection of cooked meats, although he couldn't tell which animal they'd come from. Given his current hunger, he wouldn't have cared if it had once been a horse's arse, and their spirits were raised when they were told to sit, and bowls of rice and meat were handed round. It wasn't exactly a banquet, but he could see from the smiles on the faces of the other hostages that it was the best they had eaten in a long time. Grant watched a group of men who were gathered around a box, deep in discussion, torches masked with red tape illuminating a drawing of some kind. It looked to him like one of the many free-for-alls he had taken part in while on operations, when his small squad would evaluate a situation and all offer their opinions, regardless of rank. He popped another piece of horse-arse into his mouth just as the group broke up and started to walk towards the huddled hostages, causing him to stop mid-mastication. 2 of the men were taller than the others, their attire different and their features Arabic. Grant's entire body froze as he stared at the face of the man he'd been researching for the last 9 months, the man who had effectively ended the life of Tom Gray. After he'd left his hospital bed in Subic Freeport, the first thing Grant had done was get internet access. Farrar had agreed to it and had provided the laptop, but only after reminding him that his old life was over and he shouldn't try to contact anyone from the past. During Tom Gray's siege, he had communicated with the friends that supported him with dead-drop emails. This involved writing and saving the email, but never sending them. The recipients would log onto the same account regularly to read them, thus never leaving an electronic trail. Farrar and his bosses had learned their lesson and set up security privileges on the machine so that it refused to load the websites of any email providers. Grant also suspected it contained a key logging program which would record every stroke on the keyboard. Unfortunately, his knowledge of computers wasn't advanced enough to check for such software, and searching for help online would just alert Farrar to his intentions if any were installed. Instead, Grant had worked on the assumption that everything he did was being monitored. The first search string he had entered into Google was Tom Gray, and he wasn't surprised to see the search engine's announcement that there were about 3.5 billion results. His first port of call was the BBC News website, where he first discovered the name of the man suspected of attacking him. Abdul Mansour had also been accused of killing a pensioner in a nearby village as part of his escape, although he had spared the lives of an ambulance crew he'd taken hostage. According to their testimony, it was so that they could let the world know who had been responsible for the attack. Grant then did a search for Abdul Mansour. Judging by the number of search results, Grant guessed he'd gotten the message across. He found reports on Mansour's background, from growing up as Ahmed Al-Ali in Ladbroke Grove, London, to his reported activities in Afghanistan and Pakistan, both before and after the attack in Sussex. Grant immediately recognised Abdul Mansour and had to use all his willpower not to stare at him as he stopped to survey the hostages. His whole body was tense, not with fear, but with the rising anger he felt at meeting the man who had tried to kill him. He'd anticipated this day would come, but not under these circumstances. He'd expected to be the hunter rather than the prey, or at least be armed with more than a pointy stick when they met. Mansour stood over the group and played the light over them. His eye was drawn to Grant.
"We have no more need for these people," the man standing next to Mansour said. "Guarding them will be a waste of men, and we no longer need the money they will bring us."
He gave some orders, and his men moved in.
"Not so hasty, my friend," Mansour said, holding out his arm. "They have more than just a monetary value. After we attack the base on Friday night, the army will come at us in numbers, but they will be handicapped if we still have these hostages. They put a high value on human life, and that is a weakness we will exploit. Besides," he was staring at Grant, who saw the same look Vic Phillips had been giving him for the last couple of days. "What's your name?" Mansour asked.
"Sam."
Mansour's eyebrows furrowed. "You look familiar."
"He gets that a lot," Vic said, but her comment was ignored. Mansour continued to stare, and Grant did his best not to appear uncomfortable.
"What do you do for a living?"
Mansour asked Grant. While his new looks might hide his past, Grant knew that his voice would be the one giveaway, and he tried to keep his answer as short as possible.
"I make websites."
Mansour asked a few more questions, but each time Grant answered in as few syllables as possible. Mansour looked like he was searching for something in his mind, but then he shook his head and walked away. Once he'd gone, Vic inched closer to Grant. "Tom," she whispered. Grant turned to face her and immediately realised what he'd done. "I knew it. You're Tom Gray." Grant gestured for her to keep her voice down, knowing that denying it would be futile. "Oh my God, I thought you were dead."
"That was the plan," Grant said. "How did you know?"
She took a moment to compose herself. "I may be a travel writer, but in order to pay for my trips, I write for several publications. When you released your justice bill last year, I was one of those opposed to it and wrote an article explaining why it was a non-starter. I did a lot of research on you, including watching your appearances on the news over and over again. That's where I knew your voice from."
"That's it?"
"No, the voice was only part of it. When you saved me from that bullet, I knew you were no ordinary business owner, and I saw the look on Abdul Mansour's face when he walked up to you. I think he's close to recognising you too. Maybe it's a good job the explosion altered your appearance somewhat."
"You know who he is?" Grant asked.
"Are you kidding? After he attacked you, his face was all over the news. He's more notorious than Osama bin Laden."
"Look, you have to forget about Tom Gray. I mean, you have to forget about me being Tom Gray. It's complicated, but if you tell anyone I'm alive, they'll kill the both of us. Now eat your food."
"But who would want to kill you?" she persisted. It was a conversation he didn't want to have, but she had to know the danger she had stumbled into, a danger greater than her current situation.
"Think about it. The government announced my death to the whole world. How happy do you think they'd be if you proved they had lied, eh? They know where I am right now, And if you ever mention my name and link me to this place, they will know you are telling the truth. Oh, they'll dismiss you as a crackpot, saying it was post-traumatic stress disorder or something similar brought on by your ordeal, but they won't risk someone believing you and reigniting the fire.
They wouldn't do that, she insisted. That only happens in books and films, not real life. The British government doesn't murder its own people.
Don't be so naive. The government as a whole might not sanction it, but individuals will do all they can to hold on to their power. If anyone threatens their position, they will do anything to eliminate the danger.
Then why did you agree to the name change?
I didn't agree. Not at the time. I only found out about it when I woke from a coma 2 months after the attack. And by then the choice was either to accept the new life or go back to sleep permanently. They even performed plastic surgery to make me look even less like Tom Gray. I'm banished from the UK, I can't contact anyone from my past, and I didn't get a real say in any of it. If they can do that to someone who had such a high public profile, they wouldn't hesitate to silence someone who, and I mean no disrespect, they've never heard of.
But I don't understand. Why keep you alive if you are such a thorn in their side?
That was one of my first questions, and it seems some friends of mine had them over a barrel. I don't know the full details, but they negotiated a deal whereby I get a new life and the government's lies aren't exposed. I guess it would have been easy enough to get rid of me, but to silence my 8 friends too would have been a red flag to the conspiracy theorists.
I see, Vic said. That's gotta suck.
As I said, I didn't have a choice, and if we don't get out of here sharpish, it's going to suck a whole lot more.
What's your plan?
Not a plan as such. A couple of friends are on their way to get me, and we just need to be ready when they get here.
Baines and Smart. I knew those names were familiar. They were part of your team last year, weren't they?
That's right, and hopefully they'll be here sometime soon. When it all kicks off, you need to do exactly as I say. You understand?
Vic nodded, and Grant reminded her to tell no one, but she wasn't going to let it lie. I'm a writer, Tom, and this is absolute gold. I can't just pretend I don't know about the story of the century.
Just leave it, Grant said, throwing her a look and signalling the end of the conversation.
A few minutes later, his guard arrived with the handcuffs, and he settled down to another night of broken sleep.